Hi, it's the Sugar Freedom Lady, Catherine Gordon. Today's episode is Darius Mozaffarian, MD, on Real Time with Bill Maher. If you tuned in to my last episode where I talked about Bill Maher, and I said thank you to Bill Maher about addressing nutrition in this time of COVID-19, you probably know that I used to have a crush on him back when he did Politically Incorrect. I am nutritionally incorrect because I do believe in cutting sugar, grains, and processed vegetable oils. A lot of what we've been told about nutrition over the years is, just everything in moderation, just pull back those calories and everything will be fine. Well, people like Bill and me are beginning to discover that the way we are eating is affecting our metabolic health, and that is really affecting us during this time of COVID-19. So a couple of things I want to cover about this episode of Darius Mozaffarian, MD, being on Real Time with Bill Maher. Dr. Mozaffarian is at Tufts University, and he is dealing with nutrition and metabolic health. And this is so important for us right now as we're coming out of lockdown. One of the things that Bill Maher talks about on this episode, and I do hope that you'll watch it, and when I finish this episode of my show, I will add a link to that and also some links to nutrition and other articles that I think that will be helpful. But one of the main points that Bill brings up is that with all of the press conferences and all of the news that we've been hearing, nobody is really talking about the things that we can do to prevent our susceptibility to serious consequences of COVID-19. As he says that he sees all of these press conferences with Dr. Fauci and Dr. Birx, and they're saying wear a mask and practice social distancing, but they're not talking about the things that we can do to actually become healthier and become more resistant to serious consequences of COVID-19. Dr. Mozaffarian brings up the fact that only 12% of Americans are metabolically healthy. So what does metabolic health mean? That their blood sugar, their blood pressure, waist circumference, and their HDL triglyceride ratios are in a healthy range. Only 12% of the American population is in a healthy range. We do know this from COVID-19, that we know that the people of highest risk of hospitalization, getting put on a ventilator, and at the highest risk of death are people who are metabolically unhealthy. And so the understanding of what metabolically unhealthy is, it's not just your height, it's not just your weight, it's not just your BMI, it's this concept of your blood sugar, your blood pressure, your waist circumference, and your HDL triglyceride ratio. One of the best ways that you can know if you're metabolically healthy is just measure your waistline, and you want your waist to be less than 50% of your height. That's the easiest measurement that you can do, because one of the problems with weighing yourself is that BMI and your weight doesn't tell you about your metabolic distribution of body fat. So another thing that Dr. Mozaffarian talks about on Bill Maher's program is that diabetes and obesity make us 8 times more susceptible to the risk of hospitalization from COVID-19. We need to go out and live in the real world. I mean, we're dealing with reality here. One of the things that they talked about on the show is the missed opportunity. There was an opportunity while we were locked down to actually change our metabolic health, because Dr. Mozaffarian tells us that it only takes 4 to 6 weeks to actually improve your metabolic health. And Bill Maher asks him, well, what are we supposed to do? And Dr. Mozaffarian talks about small changes, but he doesn't talk about specifics. So I would like to share some specifics with you today. You probably know, if you've watched this channel before, and I hope that you will subscribe, is that I have 2 things that I want people to do in order to improve their metabolic health. Number 1, drop sugar. Number 2, lift weight. When we drop sugar, we come back into our metabolic health. And it's not just sugar. It's not just honey and the sweet stuff, the white stuff that's on the table that you put in your coffee or that you add on top of your Rice Krispies. It's not just sugar and honey and fructose and galactose and lactose. It's also the grains and the highly processed foods that break down easily into sugar. And also, my last episode that talked about Bill Maher's show talked about Kate Shanahan, and she was talking about the 3rd crucial element, which is processed vegetable and seed oils. But in order to simplify my message, because I am the Sugar Freedom Lady, the 2 things are drop sugar and lift weight. So once again, so your sugar is not just sugar, fructose, high fructose corn syrup, but it's also the high starch foods that very often are the inexpensive, convenient foods that you just reach for in order to feel better. There's a fascinating story in the Atlantic about the biscuit, the biscuit that's made in India, the glucose biscuit that kept people rolling, kept people going. And the reality is that in the moment, if you are losing energy and if you are a sugar burner, if you live on glucose, if you grab one of those glucose biscuits, you are going to feel better fast. But what I would like to advocate for, especially if you're like me, and you've been pre-diabetic and you've been obese, is this concept that we're going to switch from being a sugar burner to being a fat burner. Let me address pre-diabetes, diabetes type 2, and obesity because I was there. My issues, insulin resistance with sugar, started when I was just a child. I lost my father when I was only 6 years old, and after he passed, I started to overeat sugar. And I began to have trouble with that. I had eczema, I had gum disease. I got it under control in adolescence because I started smoking and using Dexatrim, not the way you want to do it, correct? But it went out of control when I became pregnant, when I wanted to get ready to get pregnant because I wanted to be healthy. And so I stopped doing unhealthy behaviors. I stopped drinking and I stopped smoking, but I replaced those with more sugar, even sugar from fruit and pasta and whole grain breads, which my doctor and the nutrition books told me were healthy for being pregnant. I ended up with PIH, pregnancy-induced hypertension. Hypertension is actually one of the risk factors for having a bad reaction to COVID. It's all connected. So what I had to do, because I was pre-diabetic and I had impaired glucose tolerance during my pregnancy, so I had to manage impaired glucose tolerance and obesity once I had my child. And unfortunately, I stayed obese for 7 years because I kept trying to reduce my calories and do more cardio, and it was just making everything worse. So that's how I came to, because I lost 70 pounds, which is more than half of what I weigh now, and I've kept it off for 12 years. And I did that by, once again, dropping sugar and lifting weight, because Dr. Mozaffarian on this episode talks about small changes, but he doesn't specifically talk about what those small changes are. So some of the things that you could do is shop the outside aisles of the grocery store. The other thing is, I call it the farmer's market diet. Basically, anything that you can get at a farmer's market, which is going to be fresh vegetables, it's going to be fresh fruits. We do have people who bring grass-fed meat to our farmer's market, and they also bring pastured eggs from their homes. So what you're going to have is you're going to have humanely raised animals, and you're going to have locally raised fruits and vegetables. I'm very careful about fruit because I've been pre-diabetic and had all of these issues, so I don't eat a lot of fruit. I'm actually probably going to eat the blackberries that we're growing in our backyard now, but I don't eat, bananas and grapes and the high sugar fruits. So it's this concept of, I call it like a farmer's market diet, that if you can get it at the farmer's market, and of course, not the scones and the biscuits that might be brought in, but if you get it at the farmer's market, if it's growing locally, and if it's raised locally and processed locally, your meats, it's probably going to be something that's going to benefit your metabolic health. So this is the important thing. And one of the things that, Bill Maher and Dr. Mozaffarian talk about is how regretful it is that we had this time on lockdown, that we could have been focusing on our metabolic health. And I just wish it's not too late. And that's what Dr. Mozaffarian says, is it is not too late. We can start focusing on our metabolic health right now. So the 3 things I want to leave you with is, if we want to make this shift for metabolically healthy food, the first thing that Craig Ballantyne told me back in 2008 when I did his transformation contest, nothing out of a bag or a box. And even if, so you might say, well, wait a minute, there are some things that come in a bag. I might get a bag of lemons or something like that. But the idea of nothing out of a bag or a box is that it's not a processed, starchy, sweet, shelf-stable food. And if there is something that you buy that's in a bag or a box, at least read that box to see what's in there and make sure that sugar isn't any higher than the fifth ingredient. And oh, one of the ways they hide that is they'll call it glucose, so they'll call it fructose, so they'll call it, I don't know, corn sweetener, so that it isn't really high on the ingredient list. So learn the names for sugar. So nothing out of a bag or a box. Reduce the sugar. So that's number one. Number two is lift weight. And the reason why is that lean muscle metabolizes glucose. So it can actually, your lean muscle, if you've got that lean muscle, so do some push-ups, do some squats, do some deadlifts. If you're building that lean muscle, it's actually going to burn that sugar for you. So that sugar is going to be used as energy instead of being stored as fat, especially visceral fat. So that's two. Number three, you do need to focus on getting some good sleep. Sleep really makes a difference in your body's ability to metabolize glucose. And some simple things that you can do is just make sure that you have all of the media and electronics out of your sleeping space. Make sure that you can make the room dark. I got inexpensive blackout curtains at just like the big, like, is it Home Goods, or anyway, just at a store that had very inexpensive blackout curtains, and we put an extra rod up above the windows because we had blinds, and then we put the blackout curtains over the blinds, and that makes the room really dark. And then not just get the electronics out and get the room dark, but do your best to stop processing news, electronics, information about 30 minutes before bedtime, so those cortisol levels can drop so that you can get to sleep. So there it is. It's the sugar, it's the weightlifting, it's the sleep. And then finally is think about things that you enjoy that you can replace junk food with. So a lot of the reason that I used to be addicted to junk food is that I was seeking pleasure. I was seeking enjoyment. So try to find things that you enjoy as much as or even more than food. It could be romance. It could be books. I like to draw. I like music. I like to sing. It could even be, I suppose it could be video games, but of course we want to get rid of those electronics 30 minutes before we go to sleep. But specifically look for things that you like to do that don't involve food. So thank you, Bill Maher, for addressing these issues. So few people in the media are out there talking about sugar and food and our lifestyle in nutrition and how that affects our ability to stay safe during this time of COVID-19. Thanks, everybody. I'll be back soon with another episode of The Sugar Freedom Show. Be well.